to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
I work with an elite team called the Alpha Syndicate. We just fought an Egyptian crocodile god. Part 1 by PineMoonPoet. Money talks. Always has. That's what's brought me to the Syndicate after all. I was fresh off the force, facing eviction, just sort of wandering without direction. I'd applied to any job I figured a guy like me could get my hands on. Security guard for a bank, bodyguard for some unappreciative 20-year-old man-child. Hell, I even thought about getting my bail bondsman's license. All were met with conceited sighs and, "Sorry, we're not hiring. Try again later in the year." That's really easy to say when you're not worried about putting food on the table, or if you can even make rent. I made the decision to do what anyone with a little money would do in my situation, and went to wash my sorrows away at the local dive bar. Figured a few bottles of feel-good could take my mind off the situation for a couple of hours at least. It was there in that small-town crap hole, leaning on a sticky, weathered bar top, that I met Mr. Beck. Rough day. I looked around and saw the place was pretty much dead except for one man. He wasn't just talking to thin air. "That easy to tell, huh?" I said, draining the last drops from my 4th beer. He chuckled, a greasy, almost weasel-like laugh. "Always can tell a man down on his luck. That's how I make a living." He sauntered over, plopping on the stool next to mine, and outstretched his hand. "Wilson Beck, talent scout." "Marcus Kent, not interested in your pyramid scheme." "Ha ha!" Again I heard the same weasel-like laugh. "You misunderstand me, Mr. Kent. I'm not in that line of business." He reached inside the lining of his suit and retrieved a nondescript black business card, sliding it across the bar in my direction. "Alpha Syndicate Consolidation Services." He spoke in almost a whisper. Turning over the front of the card, revealed the same jet-black background, with embossed gold lettering. Its logo was simple, the Roman symbol for Alpha entwined with the Omega symbol arching above. The card was void of a phone number or email. Hell, there wasn't even a website, just simple coordinates. One of my eyebrows cocked up in confusion as I looked back at the man. "Is this a joke?" I asked. He chuckled coolly and shook his head. "Not a joke at all, my good sir, but an interview. A chance for a new exciting world of employment and opportunity to make more money than you could ever spend." He made the classic gesture of rubbing his thumb against his fingers. "I see. Any particular reason you're peddling the pitch to me? I'm not a banker or a stock trader or whatever it is you do." A small smirk graced his face. "We have no use for bankers, brokers, or businessmen. What we require is men and women who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. People who live to feel that rush of adrenaline as they dive into the great unknown. An aptitude with firearms doesn't hurt either. And judging by the haircut and build, in a town full of farmers and fishermen, I'd bet you were either law enforcement or recently separated from the military. Either way is a big bonus with our hiring manager." My eyes went wide. This guy was good. Either that or just lucky. I turned the card around in my hand and looked over at him. I was desperate. I doubted this opportunity would present itself twice, no matter how shady it seemed. "What do I need to do?" I had no idea what to expect on the long drive up the trail to the facility. The driver weaved in between the pines of the Tennessee wilderness, heading up a steep embankment nearly vertical. I was awestruck by the view. Pine trees peeking above the dense fog as far as the eye could see. There was nothing man-made for miles around. No telephone or power lines. No radio towers or even fire watch stations. completely bare and untouched by man. "We've arrived, sir." The posh driver looked at me through the rearview mirror. I nodded and stepped out of the vehicle. Our final destination was a huge black complex, complete with office windows and a revolving door, a testament to corporate America, sitting in the middle of nowhere. I started to wonder if I belonged to this place, but there seemed to be no turning back. Soon enough, I heard the Jeep and driver speed off down the mountainside. I suppose there was nowhere to go, but in. Orientation was a blur. Lots of medical screenings, standard gear assignments, and numerous PowerPoints about policy and standards. All this information, yet I still didn't know what I was actually doing. Those questions were soon answered after lunch, when I was led into a small briefing room. Before me sat 5 people. All were decked out in the newest tactical gear, and everyone seemed less than enthused upon seeing me. "Doc, what's the deal with the new guy?" A blonde-haired man stuck his thumb in my direction. His face was dirty and tan except for around the eyes. The baseball cap, pulled backwards, hid his shaggy mane. "He's covering down as the 5th man since we lost Garcia," an older gentleman said. His long, gray hair, tied back in a ponytail, gave some sense of professionalism, yet his beard could have belonged to your standard mountain man. Blonde-haired man piped up again. "So first Garcia goes and croaks, putting us down a man. Now we have to babysit some new blood who hasn't even been in the field." "Yes," the old man retorted, "and you will sit down, shut up, and deal with it. Or you can stay your ass here. I don't have a problem finding 2 replacements in one day." There was a moment of silence as the old man narrowed his eyes at the blonde. Suddenly, with a clearing of the throat, he stood up and faced me. "Nice to meet you. Marcus, right?" I nodded, trying not to fumble my words. Yes. Nice to meet you." I stretched my hand in an attempt to shake his, though he just looked at it and back to me. "Good to have you, man. Name's Trevor, but feel free to call me Doc. I'm the resident medic and squad leader here. Welcome to Whiskey Team." He pointed to an empty chair and then to the other people in the room. "This here's Paige." He pointed to a slightly older woman with long dark hair and brown eyes. It was hard to place her origin, but she gave off a slight Central American vibe. "Lead engineer and second in command. You need something and can't find me, you go to her." She gave me a wave. Trevor jerked his thumb to the end of the table, to a large black gentleman with thick glasses. "That's Wade, heavy weapons specialist." "Good to meet you, man," Wade growled out. "Likewise." Trevor concluded with a heavy sigh. "And this is Eric. He's best shot in the place," Eric chimed in. A scowl came across Trevor's face. "Eric is our marksman and scout. You will be filling the role as pointman in the outfit." "Pointman? But what is it we exactly do?" I said, a bit exasperated. A chuckle broke out from the group. "Well, that answers the question as to what they tell the new joins." He grabbed a remote and pointed it to a small television on the wall opposite mine. "What we do is this." He clicked the remote. On screen, I saw a recording of armed gunmen assaulting a building. They breached the door, moving in tactically, sweeping the halls, scanning every inch of the area. They walked in step, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Yet that wasn't the only noise I was able to hear. A sick suckling sound permeated the air. Sounds of gluttonous chewing and swallowing over and over. The men crept closer and I heard other sounds. The sounds of people screaming, begging against everything for something to stop. Bones snapping like twigs, the gushing of liquids being splattered against the wall. The men stepped forward even quieter than before and stacked up on a door slightly ajar as they got ready to go in. The last thing I heard in the video was what sounded like a woman. She was weeping, bawling uncontrollably, and from what I could discern, praying. A boot kicked open the door, all weapons pointing in the same direction, and then I was able to see it. The figure before me on the screen was something so twisted, so horrible that I wouldn't be able to dream it up in my worst nightmare. It was sickly green, its body covered in gangrenous, pus-filled sacs. Its legs were twisted and gnarled, no longer any creature I had ever seen. The arms looked broken and irregular as it gripped a man, lifting him effortlessly in the air. The deep indentations leading up to the creature's neck opened, revealing a large, gaping maw, filled with razor-sharp teeth. It devoured the man whole, chewing him. The sickening sounds of bones breaking and grinding on the skin mixed with the last dying gasps as he was pushed down into the creature's swollen belly. It turned to look at the men. Its black, soulless husks of eyes stared at the soldiers lifelessly. With a cracking of the concrete floors, it burst forward to them. "Put it down!" I heard a familiar voice say through the radio. Machine guns erupted. After a few seconds, the smoke cleared and the creature lay still, its body riddled with bullet holes as the men stepped further into the room. They scanned the area. It looked to be some sort of lab, complete with test equipment and chemistry stations. Blood and viscera covered the room as well as bodies. Some were slashed and gutted. Some were half-eaten, organs strewn throughout the floor. "Secure the package and burn the body," the voice chirped out again, and the camera turned to see a woman. Her eyes were wide and shaking, the mascara that was once there now running down her face. The person behind the camera grabbed her, causing her to let out a blood-curdling scream. "Package secured," a gruff British voice radioed back as the camera turned. Two men covered the creature in kerosene and struck a match, lighting its body ablaze. "Roger. Prep for exfil." The men left the room as the video cut to black. I sat there in silence. So many thoughts came to my head. I would have asked if the footage was a hoax or something. Finally, the words came out as straightforward as they could be. "What the frick was that?" I shouted. "Who were they? Was that real?" I was standing now, talking a mile a minute. "That can't be real. What the hell?" I stopped as I noticed everyone was smirking. "Aw, I love this part, when they're all scared and nervous. Never gets old." Eric laughed and gave me a contemptuous look. "Buckle up, Buttercup, 'cause it gets way worse than that." Trevor came over and put a hand on my shoulder. I could tell he was trying to handle this conversation with a bit of tact. "That," he began, "is what happens when a pharmaceutical nonprofit uses herbs found from a Mayan tomb in hopes of synthesizing a drug to help cure sterility and injects it into a test subject. Needless to say, it didn't go over too well. We, as well as the government, were notified of the outbreak 72 hours before the insurrection. A senator's daughter was working there at the time. He paid for her safe extraction and elimination of threat, if able. That was what you saw." He narrowed his eyes. "That's what we do, Marcus. We bite back at the things that go bump in the night and make a killing cleaning up the messes of the paranormal and occult. So you have a choice. Walk out that door now and forget about everything you've witnessed today. It's not like anyone would believe you. Or," he tightened his grip on my shoulder, "stay and become wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. Or option C," Eric chimed in, "get marked by some cosmic horror and let us take your cut." "Shut it, Eric," Trevor replied sternly. "So, what will it be?" A few hours later, I found myself sitting in a dimly lit briefing room. After agreeing to take the spot on the team, I was whisked away to the supply area and fitted with my new attire. In this case, cargo pants, a long-sleeve black shirt, a plate carrier able to better protect my chest and back from any unfriendly fire, boots, and a boonie hat. I was then issued my Beretta pistol and an M4 short and sturdy. They wanted to issue me weapons that would feel familiar to me based on prior experience. Trevor and Paige worked perfectly in sync, tossing rifles back and forth, loading them and checking the sights. Wade grunted in the corner as he hefted a massive belt-fed monster up onto his shoulder. Eric was holding his bolt-action rifle like a father would hold a child as he gently oiled the bolt-carrier group. We were then ushered into a small classroom with a projector pointed towards the board. Everyone took their places, each taking their own desk. 5 minutes later, a small, stubby woman walked in through the door. She wore a green pantsuit and expensive diamond earrings, which tried and failed at distracting from her odd, bowl-style haircut. Apparently, there was no time for introductions, as she grabbed the remote to the projector and clicked it, revealing a rather tall man with short graying hair. His face looked weathered and leathery with eyeglasses from a different era hanging low off his broken nose. "This is Roger Anderson." The woman broke the silence with a low, monotone drawl. "A known archaeologist from London specializing in Egyptian dynasties." She clicked the remote again, pulling up a satellite image of a desert, with several red circles drawn around a few entrances to what seemed like caves. "Mr. Anderson has been on an expedition for the last few months in the Wadi Hitan National Park, west of Ferrum, trying to discern the significance of people's worship of the god known as Sobek. He sought to extract his knowledge from some of the few recently unearthed tombs along the area. His expected arrival back to London was supposed to be January 12th, 6 days ago." The woman paused. His estate seemed rather worried, as Mr. Anderson has never missed a deadline before. Their first thought was to contact Egyptian law enforcement to send a search party. That was until yesterday when we received this audio transmission. She clicked the remote. "Hello?" A male British accent came over the speaker. Short, raspy breath came over the audio. He sounded out of breath and manic. "Found coin. World shattered. Masterpiece. Can't sleep. Stay away." His once calm voice went wild. He shouted incoherently and babbled before finding his composure. "Please, send help. Find the valley. Beware the Nile." Then the audio stopped. The woman looked unfazed. Naturally, this audio found its way to us. Mr. Anderson's estate has paid the sum of $750,000 in order for his safe return and delivery of whatever item he seems to have found. Planned departure from a private hangar in Nashville International Airport will take place in 3 hours. Grab your briefings on the way out. She shut off the presentation and walked out of the room. Eric was the first to speak as the lights came up. "Well, it's good to see Susan in such a chipper mood." Trevor let out a heavy sigh. He stood and grabbed a manila folder, thumbing through the paperwork. "Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen the woman smile. Regardless, we've got a job to do, so be happy about that, I suppose." He looked in my direction. "Don't worry, man. Simple snatch and grab. We go in, get the guy and whatever shit that he shouldn't be messing with, and get him back to the Queen. We'll be back home before you know it, and you'll be $100,000 richer." He said it in such a casual manner it seemed impossible to believe. I'm sorry, did you say $100,000? As in $100,000? Well, technically $135,000, Paige chimed in. I looked over and saw her rolling a few cigarettes for the journey. 750,000 minus the 10% the company takes off, then divided by 5 for the team. She looked up and smiled at me. "Not the most lucrative job we've pulled, but a decent one to get you started, you know?" I stood there in shock for a moment. I never considered that I could ever earn so much at one time in my life. A folder hitting my chest broke me from my daydreaming, as Trevor looked at me sternly. "Focus up. You got the job. Now make sure you stay alive to enjoy the payday. Read the report. Get familiar with what you're doing and be ready to hit the ground running once we touch down." He looked around the room. Grab your shit and get to the car park. We leave in 10. The drive to the airport was fairly uneventful. I sat in the front passenger seat listening to the local top 100 as I thumbed through the report. Anderson seemed like a normal guy. Eccentric maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary. He made his fortune in the early 90s, bringing back a treasure trove of ancient religious relics. His claim to fame, however, was his theories of mummification. Files upon files, dissecting his claim that certain rites were conducted, not in an attempt to preserve the body for the great beyond, but to appease something that resided here on earth. He went on and on, arguing that once the internal organs were removed, there was evidence that a ritualistic offering took place beneath certain temples, though for what reason, he didn't say. "Good to see you studying," Trevor said. "Trying to, anyway. Sure hate to run into something like y'all did in that video." "Oh, that? Kid, I'm not scared of things that can be brought down with enough lead. It's the shit that gets back up after emptying a mag that scares me." The car grew quiet again for a while. Before I knew it, we had pulled onto the tarmac and to a stop. "All right," Trevor said. "Everyone on." The jet was pretty ritzy, dark-tinted windows and enough space for us all to get some rest before landing, complete with a small kitchen and fridge for all that we could need. I had honestly nearly forgotten what I was doing here when I leaned my chair back into a makeshift bed and watched as we took off. The excitement must have worn me out because I nodded off and didn't wake up until I felt the rumble of the aircraft as we touched down. The cabin lights came on as Trevor walked the aisle, rousing each of us. He was already in full tactical gear with his rifle slung across his chest. "Rise and shine, team. Early bird gets the worm and whatnot. Grab your gear, clean up your trash, and get the hell off. Locals will be meeting us with trucks in about 30 minutes. I want to get into the desert before I start getting sunburned." Groans of protest echoed throughout the cabin, particularly with Eric, who managed to grumble out 5 more minutes before being jerked up by Trevor, who handed him his bags. I quickly cleaned my area, grabbed my rifle, and set off to see the landscape. Holy shit, that was all I could think once my eyes adjusted to the pink dawn sky. Looked like something out of a postcard. Sunken ancient buildings, the wind cutting through the deep brown sand on the massive dunes in the distance. This was an ancient place, holy and peaceful. "First time in Egypt?" Paige nudged my arms, yelling in order to speak over the turbines. "First time out of Tennessee," I gave her a half smile. "Always wanted to leave, just didn't." She smiled widely and let out a small laugh. "Get used to it, rookie. Honestly, we rarely pull jobs in the States." She hiked up her bag up to her shoulder and made her way down the stairs. "That's odd. I figured with all the Indian graveyards and shit like Salem, we'd have something there." She sucked in through her teeth and shuddered. "Oh, God, no. That Bruja stuff? Spirits and witchcraft. We handle the more tangible side of the occult. Don't really do us any good if we can't shoot something now, does it?" I nodded, watching her take her pack and throw it to the ground. I followed her lead, facing towards the soon-to-be rising sun. "Question, where are we? I'd figured we'd be in Cairo or something, like an actual airport. Why are we in the middle of nowhere?" I looked over at her, catching her as she quickly closed the locket and pushed it beneath her vest. "Syndicate aircraft are piloted by some of the best in the world," she continued. "The jets themselves are designed for vertical takeoff and landing. Put it all together, and it's usually routine to land closer to the site, then hoof it on foot or by car from there. Saves us a few hours on mission time." "Just a shame they have height and weight limits," Wade's deep voice grumbled out, suddenly next to me. He sounded like a Rottweiler, if it could talk. Deep and dangerous. "Wasted my time getting a pilot's license, only to be told I was too big for their seats." He slung his bag down to the same as Paige. and in one fluid motion pulled his machine gun from his shoulders, planting the stock in the ground, cracking the desert floor. I cocked an eyebrow at his comment. I must have looked a little skeptical as he returned the same expression. "What? You were a pilot? I don't know. You don't really seem like the type," he answered with a shrug. "I also went to seminary school. Wouldn't believe that either, would ya?" Half his face curled in a grin, while he pulled a book from his pocket. "Yep, Wade's full of surprises, newbie." Eric came around his side, fighting off a yawn. "Stick around long enough, he may even tell you where he's from." This brought a round of laughter from the rest of the team, even Wade. I don't get it. What's so funny?" Wade shook his head. "Nothing, man. Just sort of an inside joke. You'll find out soon enough." "Hopefully, anyway," Eric chimed in, putting a hand-rolled cigarette between his lips. I caught Paige rolling her eyes. "You're going to be fine, rookie. Just remember the golden rule. Always trust—" "Cut the chatter!" Trevor's voice came from behind us. It wasn't quite a yell, but it commanded the same respect. We all turned back to look at him as he pointed east. "They're here." The locals that dropped the trucks off were friendly enough. They seemed a bit on edge, just really twitchy and constantly looking around. Honestly, their body language was the only thing about them that stood out. They wore white ponchos draped down to their waists, with matching white pants tied off at the shins, some black leather sandals lashed up their legs. The only thing that looked odd were the black bandanas they wore with the gold symbol of the Syndicate stenciled on the fabric under the left eye. Well, that and the .45s holstered to their hips. They never spoke, not once, just nodded at Trevor, who returned the gesture. 2 trucks, 2 sets of keys. Trevor and Eric took the lead while I rode with Paige, Wade, at the wheel. Soon as the doors shut, Wade reached over from the driver's seat and popped open the glove compartment. Inside lay 3 black pieces of plastic, each shaped like a small crescent moon. He handed me one before tossing the second to Paige and pushing the plastic over his ears, hooking it in place. "Comm channel. Lets us keep in contact. Put it in." I looked down at the plastic. Pretty unassuming. Hooking it in, however, I heard the crackle of audio, vibrating against my ear. Trevor's voice came over shortly after. "All right, this is Whiskey 1. Give me a comm check. Let me know everything's working." "Whiskey 2 online," Paige responded matter-of-factly. "Whiskey 3 good to go," Wade growled. "Why do you need me to say anything? I'm right here." The sound of a smack came through, followed by Eric's cry of pain. "Ow, frick, man! Whiskey 4 feeling an HR complaint." Whiskey 5 online," I said, stifling my laughter. "Roger. We're about 80 clicks out from location. We'll be there within the hour." With that, I heard the audio crackle one last time before phasing out as we drove into the dunes. While Wade was busy getting one of the trucks up a steep embankment of sand, and Paige rested her head against the window, I took the time to once again check over all my equipment. The Syndicate definitely made sure we had the top of the line with anything we needed. Nothing was repurposed, reused, or second-hand. My rifle still had a fresh-out-of-the-box smell to it. It was hard not to feel excited to use the thousands of dollars of gear strapped to my body or clutched in my hands, almost enough to make me forget that I could be shit out of some Frankenstein monster by the end of the night. Forget it, I thought. I laid my head back against the rest, watching the dunes rise and fall as the trucks came through the sand. That's a problem for future me. A sharp jolt of skidding brakes made my eyes snap open. It took me a moment to get my bearings. The ride was only supposed to be an hour. When did it get so dark? It was only when I looked out the other window that I realized the sun was still shining high and hot. The difference was that my window looked out into the mouth of a massive cavern. It would have easily swallowed a good-sized mall, flanked on the sides by 2 massive sandstone pillars, the inside lit by a bevy of torches. I was beginning to understand the scope of this hellhole we were about to walk into. "Shit," I muttered as I stepped out of the truck, my foot crunching softly against the compact desert floor. "Who are you telling?" Wade came around, eyes still glued to the cave. "Doc, you got a map for the inside, I hope," he shouted. Trevor was leaning against the truck, finishing off a cigarette. He nodded, flicking the embers and walking over. "Radioed ahead to request an escort inside. They're on their way out now. They seem pretty skittish, though. I didn't think guarding a jumpy little Brit would be all too difficult, but apparently they can't wait to get the hell out of here. Something about bad dreams, I think. My Arabic is pretty rusty, though, so they may just need to take a piss." We all laughed and kept looking around, studying the entrance. I had to turn to get a good look at its entirety. Something about it seemed off. I can't really explain, but it felt like it wasn't supposed to be here. The more I looked, the more I felt wrong with it. It gave me chills, like this wasn't a cave that we're going into, but the mouth of a monster. I stiffened up when I felt a hand clasp my shoulder. "Easy, killer. It's just me," Trevor said. He pulled out another smoke, lighting it in one swift motion, and took a drag. "Just checking to make sure you ain't got any second thoughts." I smirked and gestured for my own cigarette. He obliged and offered a lighter. I took a drag, letting the fresh smoke hit my lungs. "Not yet, but I'll let you know when I do." He nodded and faced the mouth of the cave. "Man, I tell you, you definitely lucked out on your first op." "Oh, yeah? Why's that?" "I remember my first job. Running through the Appalachians, hunting skinwalkers, tripping through trees and falling in stagnant lakes in the middle of the night. Can't do much better than bright and sunny." "I thought we didn't pull jobs in the States," I said, cocking an eyebrow. We used to. Seems that most of the baddies don't like being hunted in their own backyard, so they migrated elsewhere. So we really haven't seen much in the past 15 years. I almost dropped my cigarette in shock. "You do all these jobs and you're still working after more than a decade?" 2 decades. Trevor exhaled the smoke through his nose, looking over at me out of the corner of his eye. "Got a problem with that?" "Not really. Just, why not retire?" "I'll quit when they do," he answered. He jutted his chin forward to point at the man hustling out of the cave. "Time to go to work." Despite Trevor's earlier claims to being rusty in the guard's native language, he was able to converse with him fairly well. The guard was a short man, same apparel as the ones who dropped off the trucks, though this guy was nowhere as near as composed as the other two. He ran up to us, clutching at Trevor and excitedly telling him something. Physically, he looked rough, to say the least. His face was greasy and covered in sweat, his beard broken off into twists. His eyes, though, they looked like the ones you'd see in a picture of someone coming back from World War II. Like he'd aged years in just such a short time. He squinted through his already swollen eyes so I could barely see the glassy whites. Whatever had happened to him, he was worse off for it. "All right," Trevor said, turning to us. "Atten here is going to lead us back to Mr. Anderson. Once there, we will extract him and his co-worker. Anderson will be in our care until we touch down in the UK. Then we hand the lunatic off, say thank you for the cash, and fick off back to stateside. Good to go?" He paused, scanning our faces. We nodded in agreement. "Good. Watch your step inside, even though we have a lit path. I'm sure there's bound to be places to get lost on the way in. Eric, you'll be in the back providing security and picking up any stragglers you find. Wade will be back there as well for support. Paige, with me. Marcus?" He looked over at me. "You'll be on point with Atten. Time to shine, kid. Try not to get us lost." Whatever we thought of the cave from the outside was eclipsed by how deep it was on the inside. We must have walked for the better part of an hour, squeezing ourselves through narrow, damp fissures, crawling through holes that no one could even remotely call stable, and holding on for dear life as we tiptoed along narrow ledges, praying we wouldn't fall into the darkness below. It was only when my feet hit solid ground that we moved into the next chamber. However, I wished we could go back. We stood on a plateau overlooking what could only be described as a massive underground sea. It was quiet, but I could still hear that settling sound that lakes make when there's nothing around to drown it out. I couldn't even see the walls that surrounded the cliff we were on except for the one behind me. I had to grab onto it to steady myself from getting vertigo. Then I felt something, this overwhelming urge to look behind me, and turned my attention to the wall. It was carved with ancient symbols and hieroglyphics. They started off insignificant. A single line here and a symbol or two there. Yet as we approached the far wall where the torches are gathered, the symbols seemed to open and flood the landscape. Hell, there was even writing along the ceiling, all indecipherable and strange, yet they seemed to originate from one source, the open stone mouth of a giant block crocodile. The statue towered over us, standing close to 30 feet tall. You could impale someone on the giant meat hooks of its teeth. Below its gaping mouth sat a massive stone table, anciently ornate and arcane. This wasn't something you'd find in a history book. This place wasn't hidden by the people of time. It had been banished, left to rot away so that no one would have to bear the sight of it. I felt the familiar touch of Trevor's hand on my shoulder, causing me to jump. "Game face on," he whispered in my ear. "Don't let anyone, least of all the customer, know how freaked out you are. You're the heavy artillery here. Mercs aren't afraid of the dark, kid. Take a breath, grit your teeth, and get your bearings. Wait for the guys and meet us up there. You're doing fine." I nodded as he looked at me, his eyes steely. He returned the gesture and then looked at Paige. They walked on, scanning the area with every step. It wasn't too much longer, maybe 20 minutes, when Wade's hulking mass stomped into the dim torchlight. Eric pulled up the rear, his wiry frame looking even skinnier compared to the bigger man. "How's it hanging, newbie? Piss yourself yet?" Eric smirked as he slung his rifle onto his shoulder. "Happy to disappoint. What took y'all so long?" "Sandstorm," Wade said, looking around, taking everything in fully. "Had to cover the trucks. I'm not sure how long it'll last, but it looks bad." "Murphy's Law, right?" Eric's smile seemed a bit more genuine as he gave my chest a firm slap. "Come on, let's join the others." So close. This raven. My dear, this is a new author that has asked me to read his stories. And you ever read a story or listen to one and mentally cast the characters? I don't know. I'm seeing Eric as Bill Paxton in Aliens, and Trevor as Jeff Bridges, and I see Wade as the late wonderful Michael Clark Duncan, and the recruiter I totally saw as Steve Buscemi. And I guess going off those two movies, I also imagined Paige as Vasquez from Aliens. I don't know. My mind just put those two movies together and took the characters. Who do you guys imagine as the cast for this or any of the other stories I've read before? Please comment below. And of course, please give this a like if you liked it, and a comment's always great. If you're not subscribed, please do so. And share if you feel like it. Thank you so much, my darlings. Have a lovely day. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.